How is the Indian economy performing? To be honest, it is surprisingly resilient, almost like a bright spot in the world right now. First, let's look at some numbers. India's consumer inflation was 6.7% in July. The month before, it was 7%. So inflation appears to be cooling down in India. In fact, the Reserve Bank of India says it may have peaked in the month of April. And if so, the worst is behind us. The next economic indicator is growth. The IMF's GDP projection for India is 7.4%. That's much higher than most developing economies. China is just 3.3%. The final indicator is manufacturing output, your factories and workshops. Now, we use something called the PMI to measure manufacturing output. PMI stands for Purchasing Managers' Index. In June, India's PMI was 53.9. In July, it rose to 56.4. That's the quickest pace in almost 8 months. So India's factories are slowly getting back to speed. Compare this to the situation elsewhere. Europe is staring at a power crisis. In the US, inflation is at a multi-decade high. Japan's economy is so bad, they're asking young people to buy and drink alcohol. So how exactly did India escape the worst of it? You could say it's a mix of policy and luck. Let's focus on inflation first. Prices rise when there is too much cash in the economy. It's simple economics. If everyone has money, then money has less value. That's how it works. And during the pandemic, that's exactly what happened. Every country announced stimulus packages. This included cash handouts, subsidies, tax cuts. The idea was to put more money in people's pockets. And I have those numbers for you. America's total stimulus was almost $5.5 trillion. 5.5 trillion. 27% of their GDP. The UK spent 18% of their GDP on stimulus. Australia, almost 20%. Canada, again 20%. Japan, a mind-boggling 53%. And the European Union, 11%. Put together, the G7 spent a fortune on fiscal stimulus, nearly $8 trillion. Now, don't get me wrong, many people needed that money to survive the pandemic. It is also good politics. Hand out checks to people in trouble. But good politics is often bad economics. Take the United States, for instance. They put $1 trillion directly into bank accounts. $1 trillion. That sort of cash infusion is bound to have consequences, and it did. US inflation topped 9% in June this year. What about India's fiscal stimulus? The government of India announced 2 separate packages. Put together, they clocked $300 billion. That's around 3.5% of India's GDP. Was that enough at the time? Perhaps not. But instead of fat checks, India focused on supporting the economy, on food subsidies, on liquidity, and on growth incentives. 2 years later, it has worked in India's favor. Call it luck or foresight. The fact is, India's inflation is cooling off compared to the rest of the world. Another reason is the energy policy. After Russia invaded Ukraine, most Western countries stopped buying Russian oil. As a result, oil prices shot up. They reached $120 per barrel. Now, oil is like the remote control for inflation. If oil rises, everything becomes more expensive. So what did India do? It bought Russian oil at a discount. Reports say Russia was selling at $30 less per barrel. That's 2,400 rupees per barrel less. That's the discount. And those discounts certainly helped India. Compared to the West, this was a much better situation to be in because the West looked clueless. The US may produce oil, but their energy companies scooped up massive profits and the common man was left high and dry. In Europe, gas was the issue, not oil. Energy bills increased rapidly as Russian gas slowed down. What about China? Well, they too imported discounted Russian oil, but their economy was clipped by zero COVID lockdowns. What's the use of oil if your factories are shut anyway? India steered clear of all of that. Yes, the lockdowns were painful, but they were also short. India never obsessed itself with policies like zero COVID. The focus was on both life and livelihood. And I know it all sounds very good, and that's something to cheer about, certainly, as the world braces for a recession. But I must say here that India is not out of the woods yet. Multiple factors can still derail the economy. Number one, the global economic situation. If the US or Europe falls into recession, India will feel the blowback. Trade will slow down. The rupee will fall. Western companies could downsize Indian operations. You get the picture. In this globalized world, a recession is also exported. Factor number 2 is inflation. India's numbers are much better than the rest of the world, but they're still too high for comfort. The RBI's optimum inflation level is 4%. The actual figure is 6.7%. So keeping prices under check will be a major priority. Factor number 3, jobs. A large population means a large job market. India must create 90 million jobs by 2030. If not, there will be jobless growth. Meaning, your GDP will keep rising, but people will not have meaningful jobs. And that's a big risk for India. To navigate this crisis, India must leverage its current position. Every major economy is slowing down, so India must offer itself as the alternative for investments, for manufacturing, and for services. One example is the recent decision by Apple. The company has decided to manufacture their latest iPhone in India, the iPhone 14. The first batches will be produced by late October or November. Now, the launch is still happening out of China, but it shows that the gap is reducing. India could very well displace China as the world's iPhone maker. That's a good start. That means a lot of jobs, a lot of investments, and a lot of taxes. And that's the key to any growth story. Being the bright spot is not enough. It's about how you build on that resilience. So the next couple of years will be key for the Indian economy. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.